Stay quiet, you're just the ex-wife, she hissed at the wedding, so I toasted as the owner of the venue. The champagne glass trembled in my hand as those venomous words cut through the elegant chatter of the wedding reception. Stay quiet, you're just the ex-wife, Madison whispered, her perfectly glossed lips curled into a cruel smile as she adjusted her designer wedding dress. The same dress that cost more than most people's cars, paid for by my ex-husband's money that should have been supporting our daughter. But what Madison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been quietly planning this moment for over 2 years. And in exactly 10 minutes, I would be delivering a toast that would change everything. My name is Emma Richardson, and at 45, I thought I had my life figured out. I was a successful real estate developer in Austin, Texas, mother to a brilliant 16-year-old daughter named Sophie, and recently divorced from my husband of 18 years, David Richardson. The divorce had been brutal. David's high-powered attorney had painted me as an unstable woman who couldn't handle the pressures of his rising political career. He was running for Texas State Senate, and apparently, having an emotionally volatile ex-wife didn't fit his clean-cut family man image. The settlement had been devastating. Despite my contributions to building his career and raising our daughter, David's legal team had somehow convinced the judge that my real estate investments were high-risk ventures that made me an unfit primary guardian. I got minimal alimony, Sophie was placed in joint custody, and David got to keep most of our assets, including our beautiful family home in the hills of West Austin. But the cruelest twist was watching him parade his new fiancée, Madison Pierce, around Austin's social circles as the perfect political wife. 28 years old, blonde, bubbly, and completely devoted to advancing David's career. She was everything I apparently wasn't: young, compliant, and willing to smile pretty for the cameras while David made his speeches about family values. The wedding planning had been a spectacle that dominated Austin's society pages for months. Madison insisted on the most exclusive venue in the city, Chateau Bellevue, a stunning French-inspired estate overlooking Lake Austin that was booked years in advance. Somehow, David's connections had secured it, and Madison spent months planning what she called the wedding of the century. I tried to stay out of it, focusing on my work and spending time with Sophie when David's custody schedule allowed. But it was impossible to escape the constant reminders. Sophie would come home from her father's house with stories about wedding dress fittings and flower arrangements, trying to be diplomatic but clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Mom, do I really have to be in the wedding party?" she asked one evening as we sat in my modest 2-bedroom apartment, working on her college applications. "Madison keeps talking about how I need to lose 10 pounds to fit in the bridesmaid dress, and yesterday she suggested I get highlights to match the other bridesmaids." The fury that rose in my chest was almost overwhelming. Madison was trying to change my daughter, mold her into some perfect political accessory. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "you don't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. Have you talked to your father about this?" Sophie's face fell. "I tried, but he just says Madison is stressed about the wedding and I should be supportive. He says it's important for his campaign that everything looks perfect." That night, after Sophie went to bed, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let David and Madison steamroll over my daughter's self-worth for the sake of political appearances. But I also wasn't going to fight them directly. I'd learned during the divorce that David's resources and connections made him nearly untouchable in Austin's legal and political circles. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I started by researching Chateau Bellevue more thoroughly. As a real estate developer, I knew how to dig into property records, ownership structures, and financial histories. What I discovered was fascinating. The chateau was owned by a holding company that had been struggling financially for several years. The owners were an elderly French couple, Henri and Marguerite Dubois, who had built their dream venue but were finding it increasingly difficult to manage in their 80s. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of potentially booking the venue for a corporate event. Henri and Marguerite were charming, sophisticated people who had poured their hearts and savings into creating something beautiful. But they were also clearly exhausted and worried about their financial future. "We are getting too old for this, you understand," Henri explained in his elegant French accent as he walked me through the gardens. "The bookings, they are good, but the maintenance costs, the staff management, the regulations, it becomes too much." Over the course of several months, I cultivated a genuine friendship with the Dubois couple. I helped them navigate some regulatory issues with the city, connected them with better suppliers to reduce costs, and even helped Marguerite with her English when she was dealing with difficult clients. They began to trust me, to see me as someone who understood and appreciated what they had built. Meanwhile, Madison's wedding planning became increasingly elaborate and demanding. She changed vendors 3 times, sent back thousands of dollars worth of flowers because they weren't the exact shade she wanted, and made the chateau staff redo the lighting setup twice. She treated the Dubois couple like servants, snapping at Marguerite when she didn't understand Madison's rapid-fire demands and dismissing Henry's suggestions about the reception layout. "That woman, she has no class," Marguerite confided to me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "She treats our beautiful chateau like it is some cheap banquet hall. And she speaks to Henri like he is nothing. We have hosted senators, ambassadors, celebrities. Never have we been treated with such disrespect." I listened sympathetically while carefully planting seeds about the future. "Have you considered what you'll do when you're ready to retire?" I asked casually. "This place is so special, it would be terrible to see it fall into the wrong hands." The idea grew slowly, organically. I helped Henri update their business plan, showing him how the venue could be even more profitable with some strategic improvements and better marketing. I connected them with my financial advisor, who helped them understand their options for succession planning. And gradually, I began discussing the possibility of purchasing the chateau myself. "You understand what we have built here," Henri said during our negotiations. "You see the beauty, the potential. With your background in development and your appreciation for what we have created, we believe you would be the perfect person to carry on our legacy." The purchase was complex but ultimately successful. I used every connection and every dollar I had, including taking out a significant loan against my other properties. But by 6 months before David's wedding, I was the owner of Chateau Bellevue, though I kept this information strictly confidential through a carefully structured holding company. Henri and Marguerite stayed on as managers, which meant that from the outside, nothing appeared to have changed. Madison continued her aggressive wedding planning, unaware that her demands and insults were now being directed at staff who reported to me. I instructed Henri to maintain professionalism and continue honoring the existing contract, despite Madison's increasingly outrageous behavior. As the wedding date approached, Madison's true colors became more and more apparent. She fired the original wedding planner and hired someone more expensive. She demanded that Sophie lose weight and get professional hair and makeup that would cost more than most families' grocery budget for a month. She even suggested that I shouldn't attend the wedding at all, claiming my presence would be awkward and might create negative publicity for David's campaign. "Mom's not coming to Dad's wedding?" Sophie asked when David broached the subject. "But she's my mom. She should be there." To his credit, David pushed back on that particular demand. "Madison, Emma is Sophie's mother. She'll be respectful, and frankly, it would look worse for my campaign if my daughter's mother wasn't at the wedding than if she was there." But Madison found other ways to make her displeasure known. The wedding invitation that arrived at my apartment was clearly an afterthought, cheap cardstock instead of the elegant paper the other guests received, with my name misspelled and my +1 invitation forgotten. When I called to RSVP, Madison herself answered the phone. "Oh, Emma," she said sweetly, "I'm so surprised you're coming. I just want you to know that we've seated you at table 12, in the back with some of David's distant cousins. We thought it would be more comfortable for everyone if you kept a low profile. After all, this is our day, and we wouldn't want any awkwardness." Table 12 was indeed in the back, partially blocked by a pillar and far from the head table where the wedding party would be seated. It was clearly meant to minimize my presence and make me feel unwelcome. But I accepted the seating arrangement graciously, knowing that my real moment would come later. The week before the wedding, Madison's behavior reached a new low. Sophie came home in tears after the final dress fitting. She made me stand on the platform for 2 hours while she criticized everything about how I looked, Sophie sobbed. She said my shoulders were too broad, my hair was too dark, and that I needed to practice walking like a lady instead of clomping around like a farm animal. "Mom, I don't want to be in this wedding. I can't do it." That night, I held my daughter while she cried and made a promise to myself. Madison had crossed the line from merely difficult to genuinely cruel. And tomorrow, at her perfect wedding in my chateau, I was going to make sure the whole Austin social scene saw exactly who she really was. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with perfect October weather in Austin. Chateau Bellevue looked absolutely stunning, decorated with thousands of white roses and twinkling lights that created a fairy tale atmosphere. Madison had indeed planned a spectacular event, too bad she had no idea who was really paying for it. I arrived early, ostensibly to help Sophie get ready but really to make some final preparations. Henri greeted me with a subtle nod and a slight smile. Everything was in place. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. David looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, and Madison was undeniably gorgeous in her elaborate designer gown. Sophie, despite her reservations, looked lovely in her bridesmaid dress, though I could see the tension in her shoulders as she smiled for the photographer. As the bride and groom exchanged vows about love, commitment, and building a life together, I couldn't help but think about the 16 years David and I had spent doing exactly that before he decided I wasn't politically advantageous enough for his ambitions. The cocktail hour was where Madison's true personality began to show. She was in full political wife mode, charming donors and community leaders while barely acknowledging the family members and friends who had actually supported David throughout his career. I watched her air kiss her way through the crowd, each interaction calculated and performed. I maintained my low profile, chatting quietly with the distant cousins at my assigned table and keeping Sophie company when she needed a break from the wedding party duties. Several people came over to say hello. Despite Madison's best efforts, I still had friends and professional connections in Austin's social circles. "Emma, you look wonderful," said Patricia Whitman, wife of one of Austin's most prominent judges. "I was just telling Richard how impressed we've been with your recent development projects. That mixed-use complex you built in South Austin is exactly what the city needs more of." "Thank you, Patricia," I replied warmly. "It's been rewarding work. Community development that actually serves the community, not just developers' profit margins." I noticed Madison's jaw tighten slightly as she overheard the conversation from nearby. She quickly inserted herself into our group with a bright smile. "Patricia, how wonderful to see you." Madison gushed. "David and I are so excited about his infrastructure development proposals. He's really going to transform how Austin handles growth and development." Patricia smiled politely but didn't take the bait. "I'm sure he has interesting ideas. Though from what I understand, Emma here has been implementing community-focused development for years. Practice often teaches us more than theory." The slight was subtle but unmistakable. Madison's smile became more strained, and after a few more minutes of awkward conversation, she excused herself to check on the dinner preparations. As the reception moved into the main dining room, I couldn't help but admire how beautiful the space looked. The Dubois couple had truly created something magical, and Madison's planning had showcased it perfectly. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly appointed tables, and the view of Lake Austin through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. The dinner service was flawless. Henri and his team were true professionals, despite the months of Madison's abuse. I caught Henry's eye at one point and gave him a small nod of appreciation. He returned it with the slightest smile. It was during the salad course that Madison made her move. I was engaged in quiet conversation with Sophie, who had been seated at my table during dinner despite Madison's protests, when the bride appeared at my shoulder. "Emma," she said in a voice that dripped fake sweetness, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sophie tensed beside me, but I smiled calmly. "Of course, Madison. Congratulations on a beautiful ceremony, by the way. Everything looks perfect." She led me to a quiet corner near the windows, away from the other guests but not completely out of sight. Her demeanor changed immediately once we were alone. "I want to make something very clear," she said, her voice low and venomous. "This is my wedding, my day, and my family now. David has moved on, and so should you. I don't want to see you chatting with important guests like Patricia Whitman, making yourself seem relevant. You're not relevant anymore, Emma. You're just the ex-wife." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was cataloging every word for what was coming next. "I understand this is your special day, Madison. I'm just here to support Sophie and be respectful." "Good," she continued, emboldened by what she saw as my submission. "Because I've been watching you tonight, and I can tell you're trying to insert yourself into conversations where you don't belong. These people are David's constituents now, his political connections. You're just a small-time real estate developer who couldn't handle being married to someone with real ambition. The insult stung, but I maintained my composure. I appreciate you being direct about your feelings. Madison's eyes glittered with triumph. She thought she was winning, thought she was putting me in my place. I'm glad we understand each other. For the rest of the evening, I need you to stay quiet and keep a low profile. Don't embarrass David or me by trying to act like you still matter in Austin society. Stay quiet, you're just the ex-wife. She delivered this final line with such venom, such casual cruelty, that I actually smiled. Because what Madison didn't know was that Sophie had been watching our conversation from across the room. And what neither of them knew was that in exactly 5 minutes, Henri would be calling for the traditional toasts, starting with remarks from the venue owner. You're absolutely right, Madison, I said calmly. I should know my place. And very soon, I will. She looked momentarily confused by my response, but before she could ask for clarification, the sound of Henri tapping a crystal glass with a silver spoon rang through the dining room. Ladies and gentlemen, Henri announced in his distinguished accent, we will now begin the traditional toasts to celebrate our beautiful bride and groom. We are honored to have hosted this magnificent celebration here at Chateau Bellevue, and we would like to begin with a few words from our venue owner. Madison turned back toward the head table, assuming Henri was about to speak. But Henri was looking directly at me, extending his hand in invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Emma Richardson, owner of Chateau Bellevue. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. 200 guests turned to stare at me as I made my way to the front of the room, Madison's face cycling through confusion, realization, and horror as the implications sank in. I accepted the microphone from Henri with a gracious smile and took a moment to look around the room. Sophie was beaming with pride and surprise from our table. David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Madison stood frozen near the windows, her perfect composure finally cracking. Thank you, Henri, I began, my voice clear and confident. Good evening, everyone. I'm Emma Richardson, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Chateau Bellevue for this beautiful celebration. I paused, letting the reality of the situation settle over the crowd. The whispers had already begun, people were connecting the dots, remembering that I was David's ex-wife and realizing the implications of what they'd just heard. Many of you know me as Sophie's mother, or from my work in real estate development here in Austin. What you might not know is that 8 months ago, I had the privilege of purchasing this magnificent venue from Henri and Marguerite Dubois, who built Chateau Bellevue into the premier wedding destination it is today. The whispers grew louder. I could see Madison's face growing pale as she began to understand just how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. I want to thank Henri and Marguerite for trusting me with their legacy, and for continuing to manage this beautiful space with such grace and professionalism. Even in the face of challenging circumstances. That line got some knowing looks from the staff, who had witnessed months of Madison's difficult behavior. I saw several wedding industry professionals in the crowd nodding with recognition. Now, I know this might seem like unusual circumstances, the venue owner giving a toast at her ex-husband's wedding. But I think it speaks to something important about Austin's community spirit. This city has taught me that we can choose to be gracious and supportive, even in complicated situations. I turned slightly toward David and Madison, including them in my gesture while maintaining my focus on the crowd. David and I may no longer be married, but we will always be connected through our wonderful daughter Sophie, who has handled all these changes with remarkable maturity and grace. And I want Madison to know that despite any misunderstandings we may have had, I wish her genuine happiness in her new marriage. The emphasis on misunderstandings was subtle but clear to anyone who had been paying attention. Several guests glanced at Madison, whose composure was now completely shattered. But most importantly, I want to talk about something that's very close to my heart. Over the past year, as I've gotten to know Henri and Marguerite and learned about their vision for this space, I've been inspired to think about how venues like this can serve our community in meaningful ways. I pulled out a prepared note card, taking my time to build anticipation. That's why I'm excited to announce that starting next month, Chateau Bellevue will be launching a new community initiative. We'll be hosting monthly events for local nonprofits, providing space for fundraisers and awareness campaigns at no cost. We'll also be offering scholarships to help young couples who might not otherwise be able to afford their dream wedding to celebrate here. The crowd murmured with approval. This was exactly the kind of community-minded initiative that Austin's social scene loved to support. Our first scholarship recipient will be Maria Santos and James Chen, a young couple who are both social workers here in Austin. They've dedicated their careers to helping at-risk youth, and they deserve to celebrate their love in a beautiful space. The applause was genuine and warm. I had done my research. Maria and James were well known in nonprofit circles, and several guests recognized their names. I believe that spaces like this should be about bringing people together, building community, and celebrating love in all its forms. Not about exclusion or making people feel unwelcome. Another pointed reference that didn't go unnoticed. Madison had sunk into a nearby chair, her perfect wedding reception spinning out of her control. Henri and Marguerite built Chateau Bellevue on the principle that everyone deserves to feel special on their wedding day. That no one should be made to feel less than, or unwelcome, or like they don't belong. The message was crystal clear now. I wasn't just announcing my ownership of the venue, I was publicly calling out Madison's behavior without naming her directly. So let me close by saying this, to David and Madison, I hope your marriage brings you joy and growth. To our wonderful community here in Austin, thank you for supporting local businesses and the values that make our city special. And to anyone who has ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or told they don't matter, remember that sometimes the person telling you to stay quiet might not be the one with the real power in the room. The applause was thunderous. People were standing, not just politely clapping for the venue owner, but genuinely moved by the message. Sophie was crying with pride, and even some of David's political allies were nodding with approval. I handed the microphone back to Henri, who was beaming with delight. As I made my way back toward my table, I was intercepted by dozens of guests wanting to congratulate me, ask about the community initiatives, or simply express their amazement at the evening's turn of events. "Emma, that was brilliant," whispered Patricia Whitman as she hugged me. "Madison's been insufferable all evening, treating the staff like servants and acting like she owns the city." Someone needed to put her in perspective. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone," I replied diplomatically. "I just wanted to share my excitement about the venue's future." Patricia laughed. "Of course, dear. Very diplomatic. But we all know what we saw, and frankly, it was long overdue." David approached me cautiously as the crowd began to settle down for the remaining toasts. His expression was complex, part embarrassment, part anger, but also what looked like grudging respect. "Emma," he said quietly, "that was unexpected." "I'm sure it was," I replied calmly. "But everything I said was true. I do want you both to be happy, and I am excited about the community programs." He studied my face for a moment. "How long have you owned this place?" "Since February," I answered honestly. "I've been working with Henri and Marguerite to improve operations and develop the scholarship program." "And you never thought to mention this? Even when Madison was struggling with the wedding planning?" I raised an eyebrow. "David, we communicate through lawyers about custody arrangements. When exactly would I have mentioned my business investments to you?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Emma, if Madison said or did anything to offend you." "Madison made her feelings about my place in your new life very clear," I said simply. "I just wanted to make sure she understood mine." The rest of the reception proceeded with a decidedly different energy. Madison had disappeared, presumably to repair her makeup and composure. When she returned, she was subdued and avoided eye contact with most of the guests. Several people approached me throughout the evening to discuss potential events at the venue, or to ask about volunteer opportunities for the scholarship program. Sophie found me during the dancing portion of the evening, throwing her arms around me in a fierce hug. "Mom, I can't believe you bought this place. You're like a secret superhero or something. Did you see Madison's face when Henri introduced you?" I hugged my daughter tight. "I wanted to make sure you knew that no one gets to make you feel small or unwelcome, sweetheart. Not in my house, and not in your life." "Does this mean I don't have to lose 10 pounds to be in Dad's family anymore?" she asked with a grin. "Honey, you never had to change anything to be worthy of love and respect. That's something I should have made clearer a long time ago." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself alone with Henri and Marguerite in the kitchen, helping to oversee the cleanup. "That was magnificent, Emma," Marguerite said with tears in her eyes. For months, that woman treated us like we were nothing. Snapping at Henri, demanding things be redone, acting like we should be grateful for her business. Tonight, you showed everyone who we really are, what this place really means. Henri nodded emphatically. She never understood what we built here. But you do. You see that this is about more than just beautiful parties, it's about creating moments where people feel valued and celebrated. That's exactly why I wanted to buy this place, I said. You and Marguerite created something special. I just want to make sure it continues to serve the right purpose. As I gathered my things to leave, Madison approached me one final time. She had removed her elaborate veil and looked exhausted, all the fight gone out of her. Emma, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. I was cruel to you tonight. And apparently I've been cruel to a lot of people. I studied her face, looking for sincerity. She seemed genuinely shaken by the evening's events. Madison, I hope you and David are very happy together. But happiness built on making other people feel small isn't sustainable. Austin's a big city, but the community that matters is actually quite small. Treat people well, and they'll support you. Treat them poorly, and they'll remember that too. She nodded, tears threatening to ruin her makeup again. I never meant to be the person who tells someone else to stay quiet. I wanted everything to be perfect. For David's career, for our future. Perfect doesn't mean cruel, I said gently. Perfect means creating space for everyone to feel valued. That's what real leaders do, they lift people up, they don't put them down. A year later, as I write this story, Chateau Bellevue has become one of Austin's most sought-after venues, not just for its beauty but for its community involvement. We've provided scholarships to 15 couples, hosted fundraisers for dozens of nonprofits, and created a model that other venues across Texas are starting to adopt. Sophie is thriving as a senior in high school, confident and self-assured in ways that make my heart sing. She's been accepted early admission to UT's social work program, inspired by the community work she's helped me do at the chateau. David and Madison's marriage seems to have stabilized, they attend community events occasionally, and Madison has become notably more gracious in her interactions with service staff and vendors. More importantly for me, I've discovered that the most satisfying revenge isn't about humiliation or cruelty. It's about building something so beautiful and meaningful that it speaks for itself. It's about creating value that makes other people's attempts to diminish you look petty and small by comparison. The best part of owning Chateau Bellevue isn't the financial success or the social recognition. It's the thank you notes from scholarship couples, the photos from nonprofit fundraisers, the stories from guests who felt welcomed and celebrated in ways they'd never experienced before. Every time I walk through those beautiful grounds, I remember Henri and Marguerite's wisdom, this place isn't about the building or the business. It's about creating moments where people feel like they matter, where love is celebrated, where community is built one event at a time. And every time someone tries to tell me to stay quiet, to know my place, to accept being dismissed or diminished, I remember that night when I stood in front of 200 people and calmly, graciously claimed my power. Not through cruelty or revenge, but through service, community, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. If this story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences. Have you ever been told to stay quiet or know your place? How did you respond? Did you find ways to prove your worth without compromising your values? Please share your stories in the comments below, we all learn from each other's journeys of finding strength and self-respect. And if you enjoyed this story of turning the tables with grace and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're here to share stories of people who found ways to stand up for themselves and build something beautiful from difficult situations. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is simply to show up as your most authentic, powerful self. Remember, when someone tells you to stay quiet because you're just something, just the ex-wife, just the assistant, just the outsider, they're usually afraid of what might happen if you actually speak up. Your voice matters. Your perspective has value. And sometimes, the person trying to silence you might just be standing in your venue, at your table, in your space.